Imagine looking through a pane of glass that is just warped enough to bend the picture. You can still see through it, you can still recognize what's on the other side of the glass, but something's off. Lines bend, shapes stretch, details feel larger, darker, or more absolute than they really are. That is often how the mind works under pressure. Something happens, and instead of seeing it clearly, you see it through an inner lens shaped by fear, insecurity, stress, or old habits of thought. And when that lens bends the meaning of what happened, it also bends the emotional outcome. A small setback starts to feel like a disaster. A disagreement starts to feel like rejection. A flaw starts to feel like total failure. The event may be real, but the picture has been distorted. And if you don't realize the lens is bending what you see, you can start reacting to the distortion as though it were true. Welcome to MindLit Labs. I'm David Cook. So let's define the issue clearly. Cognitive distortions are common automatic thinking patterns that bend interpretation in a negative, exaggerated, or emotionally biased direction. That's the key idea. As a rule, distortions don't invent reality out of thin air. They take something real and tilt its meaning. And once meaning gets tilted, emotion follows, behavior follows, and eventually outcome follows. So this is not just about having negative thoughts. This is about what happens when the mind misreads a moment and then builds emotion and behavior on top of that misreading. So let's make two things clear: what cognitive distortions are and what they are not. When people hear the word distortion, it can sound harsh. It can sound like you are irrational or weak or lying to yourself. And that's simply not the right frame. A better way to think about cognitive distortions is this: they are default lenses. They are fast, automatic shortcuts the mind uses to interpret what is happening, especially when life feels stressful, threatening, uncertain, or emotionally loaded. That's what makes them powerful. They are quick, they are familiar, and in the moment, they often feel true. That is not a character flaw. This is not proof that you're broken. This is what minds do when they try to make sense of life quickly. The problem isn't that the mind interprets. The problem is that sometimes it interprets too fast, too negatively, and with far more certainty than the evidence supports. So cognitive distortions are thinking filters, sometimes subtle, sometimes dramatic, sometimes so familiar you don't even notice them. They just feel like reality, and that is why learning to notice them matters. Now let's draw an important distinction. First, cognitive distortions are not the same thing as emotions. Emotions are signals. They tell you that something matters. A distortion is the interpretation attached to that signal. It's the meaning layer that says, this means I'm unsafe, I'm rejected, I'm failing, this always happens to me, this means everything is falling apart. So the emotion itself is not the distortion. The distortion is the story built around the emotion. Secondly, this is not about pretending everything is fine. This is not forced positivity. We're not doing that thing where people throw a motivational quote at a real problem and pretend everything is fine. That's not wisdom. That's avoidance. The goal here is not positive thinking. The goal is accurate, grounded, truthful, and useful thinking. Thinking that fits the evidence and leads to wiser choices in action. And that, my friend, is very different from denial. Here's the basic sequence. Something happens, your mind interprets it, a thought forms, your body responds, emotion intensifies, and behavior starts moving in that direction. That's the chain. And even small distortions near the beginning of that chain can create a very different ending. Now, that doesn't mean you can think your way out of every feeling. That would be, well, too simplistic. But it does mean interpretation is one of the most powerful levers you have. And distortions often show up most aggressively when situations are unclear, when there are blanks in the story, because the brain does not like ambiguity. It wants closure. It wants answers. It wants to explain what is happening, so it fills in the blanks. And many times it fills them in with fear, regret, threat, or certainty that has not been earned. And that is when the picture starts to bend. Now, when we talk about distortion menus, we are not just using a catchy self-help label. These patterns have been identified, studied, categorized, measured. And so when we talk about cognitive distortions, we're talking about recognizable patterns such as all or nothing thinking, catastrophizing, mind reading, mental filtering, overgeneralizing, personalization, should statements, labeling, emotional reasoning, and discounting the positive. And there are many more. So let's make a few of these concrete. Mind reading says, they did not smile at me, so they must be upset with me. Catastrophizing declares, if I mess this up, everything is going to fall apart. Mental filters work something like this. You get 10 positive comments, but your mind locks onto the one negative comment and turns it into the whole story. Then you have should statements. I should be over this by now. I should not feel this way. I should be better than this. Do you see the pattern? These distortions take incomplete information and push it toward a dramatic conclusion. That is what they do. They are not just isolated thoughts. They are habits of interpretation. And if you have done any of these before, welcome to being a human being. Now this matters because distorted interpretations don't just create painful feelings. They can also create painful decisions. For example, when your mind labels uncertainty as danger, you don't just feel differently, you begin acting differently. You withdraw, assume too much, overreact, shut down. You defend yourself too quickly, or perhaps spiral too fast. And over time, those patterns can reinforce shame, depression, and relational strain. Now, we need to be careful here because one distorted thought doesn't automatically produce a mental disorder. That would be a vast overstatement. But these patterns do matter. They shape emotional experiences and behavioral responses. And in some cases, they modestly predict later emotional symptoms over time. So your thoughts are not destiny, but your patterns of interpretation matter a great deal. So here are 3 practical tools to help you. Tool number 1, name the pattern. Not to shame yourself, not to condemn yourself, just identify the lens. This is mind reading. This is emotional reasoning. Or it's all or nothing thinking. Why does that matter? Because naming the pattern creates space. It helps you step back just enough so you are no longer completely fused with the thought. Now, you're not only thinking it, you're observing it. And here is a key point to remember. Unnoticed thoughts will keep running automatically. Why? Because every unnamed emotion controls you and controls your life. However, once consciously observed and named, they often become less automatic, less believable, and less emotionally controlling. And that shift matters. Tool number 2, ask what else could this mean? This is one of the most useful questions you can ask. Come up with 2 or 3 alternative explanations. Not fantasy, not denial, not fake optimism, just other explanations that also fit the evidence. So instead of saying, I spilled the coffee in front of people and now everyone thinks I'm incompetent, you might say, I spilled the coffee. People spill coffee. Most people will forget this quickly. And if someone judges me too harshly over that, that says more about them than it does me. Tool number 3, replace distortion with accuracy. Instead of saying, I ruin everything, say, I made a mistake, but I can learn from it. Instead of saying, they're upset with me, say, I don't actually know what they are thinking. There are other possibilities. Instead of saying, this always happens to me, say, this happened today. That doesn't mean it defines everything. Balanced thinking clarifies what distorted thinking exaggerates. That is why this matters. I've said it before and I'll say it again. You're not trying to become unrealistically positive. You're trying to become more accurate. This is where the spiritual dimension becomes especially important. Scripture teaches us that not every thought deserves agreement. Not every impression deserves trust. Not every conclusion that the mind presents speaks the truth. Proverbs 28 says, whoever trusts in his own mind is a fool, but he who walks in wisdom will be delivered. 1 Corinthians 2 explains that spiritual truths are spiritually discerned and appear as foolishness to the natural mind, highlighting the necessity of the mind of Christ to properly evaluate reality. Philippians 4 provides a standard for accurate thinking, directing us to focus only on what is true, noble, right, pure, lovely, and admirable, thereby filtering out distortions. That is a call to discernment, a call to examine what has entered the mind and ask whether it is true, whether it is faithful, and whether it deserves to remain. That is not the language of denial. That's the language of surrender. It is the willingness of a person to let God expose what fear has bent, what shame has distorted, what insecurity has whispered for so long that it started sounding like truth. And that takes humility, because sometimes the most dangerous distortions are the ones that have lived in us for so long, they no longer sound distorted. They just sound familiar. But God does not call us to live under distortion. He calls us into truth. Renewal begins when we stop treating every thought like a trustworthy guide and start bringing our inner life under the light of God's truth. So let's bring this together. Cognitive distortions are common patterns of biased thinking. They bend interpretation, thus shaping our emotions. Emotions in turn shape actions. And those distortions can be recognized, challenged, and changed. So here is what I would like to ask you to do. Once a day, catch one sticky thought and write down 4 things: the thought, the distortion pattern, 2 alternative interpretations, and one small action that reflects the kind of person you want to be. Don't try to argue with every thought. Just start noticing the ones that act like a judge, a prophet of doom, or a false narrator. Then, refine the meaning with truth, reshape the emotion, and reroute the experience. Because once you recognize the pattern, you stop surrendering to it automatically. If this video has helped you, please share it today with someone who may be reacting to a distorted story without even realizing it. Because that is where change often begins. Not by pretending the event didn't happen, not by forcing yourself to feel better, not by replacing pain with shallow positivity, but by slowing down long enough to ask, am I responding to what actually happened, or am I responding to the distortion my mind attached to it? Thank you for watching, and remember, stay aware, stay curious, stay compassionate, and always keep your mind lit. Take care, and God bless.
Thanks for joining us today. Be sure to comment, like, subscribe, and follow MindLit Labs, where we explore the convergence of mind, meaning, and faith. Our goal is to help you to think deeper, live wiser, and stay grounded in what's true, good, and beautiful.